Hello and welcome to Art, Creativity, and Wellbeing. This is the show where we are always working to support you in caring for yourself as much as you care for others and those loved ones around you. And today it feels like there's a higher level to this. Today it feels like what we're going to be doing is kind of feeding our intellectual and playful souls in a conversation that I've so been looking forward to recording. I am Kay Lockhope. I'm a coach. I'm a creator. I am a thru hiker who used to need a wheelchair. And today I am here with a friend of mine named Alnoor Dhanani. Alnoor is a historian focusing on historical and contemporary interactions between science, religion, and philosophy. And the most fun thing about this whole thing to me is that we met on a plane. And I just thought, you can't make this stuff up. It's so fun. Welcome, welcome, Alnoor.
Thank you. Okay. Yeah, it was such a coincidence, right? And I think we didn't talk much at the beginning, but at some point we started talking, and it was Euclid that brought us to, kind of,
It
opened up.
really was. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, because my sons, I've learned of Euclid only the only reason I really know Euclid at all is so Euclid, you can help me if I mess this up. Um, Euclid was the person who, the mathematician who or scientist who gave us, he wanted to describe the universe, is how my one of my sons has put it. Um and he did it without numbers, which was really a that was a big draw for my kids to understand because they had, in our modern times, a lot of times it feels like you have to learn all your multiplication tables before you can get to the fun stuff. And here was the fun stuff without the multiplication tables. So,
Mm.
and you and I that day, so we were flying. I was coming home from a retreat in Spain. You were coming home from some scholarly work, I think in London, right? Or in England. And so we had a nice long flight to chat. And as you say, I think it was only the last couple hours that we really did, but that was so fun. Um, and you helped me set Euclid into a bigger landscape of science, of philosophy. Um, and I think that's really interesting because that's kind of what your work is for yourself, eh? Is to do that. Is that a
Yes.
good description?
No, this is exactly right. I know, we can think of science in a very impersonal way, but scientists are persons who belong to a particular context. And so, my engagement with the history of science is really to be able to understand the person, to understand the context, to understand the ideas of that people. And I think that as when you introduced me, you talked about my interest in also religion and philosophy because these are parts of our world, perhaps more so, let's say, in earlier times. Uh, Newton is a Unitarian, not well known, is a religious person. He wrote
Mm,
on perhaps on religious commentary than on physics, for which most people know him. And he was very interested in philosophy of science. So these subjects come together in, shall we say, many of our thoughtful scientists. Darwin, for all that is said about him, really struggled with the position that he ultimately took. Darwin wanted to be a priest when he was young,
mm.
and it was just a kind of opportunity of getting on the ship, the Beagle, for a voyage that opened up his world the way it did. Um, and I think that I think is the important thing. The science is a kind of human endeavor to understand the world and how to construct it. In some of our, let's say, subjects, we have the help of mathematics. Um, but the notion of philosophical underpinnings, how to make an argument,
Mm.
how to make projections, these are all that part of the philosophical aspect? And then what about deeply held beliefs? What about emotions? These are where I think science sometimes doesn't always help us, or maybe people formulate positions, but the positions for, are obviously contested. And so that's kind of what interests me, that as a human endeavor, there's so many different things that come into it. And I do think, even though it's a little bit unusual to say this, but science is a creative process, not like art, but there is creativity in it, in how you come up with the kind of models, hypotheses, where do they come from, So those are the kind of fascinating things if you just step outside the numbers and, those uh, nitty-gritty kind of things that scientists do.
Oh wow, I love that. You had said before when you were just before we started recording, you were sharing a little bit more about, or you were sharing a little bit with me about how you went from a very science engineering based sort of plan. You started studying those when you were 14, right? And ended up sort of feeling a call or a delight, maybe even in understanding more about why, like the observations that people were making that would have them come to the conclusions that they came to. For example, you were sharing Ptolemy saying, we need new physics. Like what we have isn't enough. We need new physics. You said that his words were, we need new physics. Um, it's so interesting to think about um, how science is a creative process. And actually, I want to grab, so I'm going to grab something quickly. Okay, so this is because I'm an artist, and Alnor, you know that, right? And our
Yeah.
listeners do too. This is a picture that I made sitting in an Airbnb that I had the opportunity to stay in about a year ago. And the reason I wanted to share it is because there is something very empirical about it. If I've got, hopefully I'm using the word empirical right. If you put if so it's trees out a window. There's the Cape Cod Orleans Inlet is what it's of. If I have these really light value places, and I have these really dark value places, like so the trees are very dark like they're dark blues, they're dark greens, right? The sun and the sun setting is very light yellow, light orange. If I if I accidentally stuck some dark values on the light values, it wouldn't look like what it is. Like the learning for me as an artist, or even in the windows, you know what I mean? Like if I didn't have the marks where they are, then it wouldn't look like what it is. And what that did for me, learning that, was it took all the judgment out of art.
Mm.
Like the judgment that I was bringing on myself of like, because I think a lot of times creativity we can feel judged harshly on it, or we can judge ourselves on what we make. And really the truth is like if you want to make something more accurate, you can just make another line, or you can take something away, or you can you can shape it using the very basics of what makes art, or what makes a picture something that you can see. And it's interesting because the meta level is so much like what you're describing, of someone having an idea, a creative idea, and then going, oh, I'll try that. And then they come back to their numbers and their measurements, and they go, oh, I'll try that, right? And it's all set in this really interesting, like human creativity and curiosity, feels like.
Yeah, no, that's great. So when you showed me the work that you have done, and you showed the everybody, and at least you pointed out some of the features you wanted to discuss. Um, I was talking to you previously about the fact that I got interested in the history of science because of this person, Ibn al-Haytham, or al-Hazan, as he's called in Latin, whose main work that is known, and which some people think led to the interest of Kepler and Newton in optics, and perhaps the whole experimental method. He is the one who kind of works the mathematics out that leads to perspective.
Yes.
So, as you know,
Wow.
that in art, how do you think about representation? And how perspective theory that comes about with Alberti and, all of those people pre-Renaissance, but post-Renaissance, at least in
Mm,
European art perspective becomes a very big aspect of, a representation. And so the representation, in a way, moves from storytelling, let's say, and I'm going to come back to that in a minute,
mm.
a way of, shall we say, a version of a pre-photograph version of representation. You want to get it as close to the way it is. And I think when you mention, in a way, how do you pick colors, it is really
Mm.
about accuracy of representation.
Yeah. Oh, this is amazing. And I'll show it again because the key, the way that it looks like you're sitting inside a room looking out the window is totally because of the angles of the lines of the literal perspective of it. And again, that was something that I had to, well, I had to play with a lot, but I also had to remember, oh, there are laws around this. There's a reason why. Um,
But
and yeah, so continue because you were going to come back to something.
yes, I was going to say that, but if you think, let's say, if your art, let's say, the piece that you draw and you paint is about telling a story, then you are not necessarily focused on of a representation in terms of the way that it looks to you.
Mm,
So if you go and look at, for example, Islamic art or Japanese art, it's not about the same kind of, let's say, uh, three-dimensionality perspective. And so it's a kind of art that it looks different because it's trying to convey something different. Uh,
mm,
Perspective, in a way, is about naturalism. Now, of course, as you know, if you go look at Picasso's Cubist period, it becomes a different thing. And as you're mentioning, it's, what is the idea in our that we have that leads to the kind of art that we produce? I think is the way to think about it. So my the person I admire who did this work on optics, when he's writing on optics, he's actually interested in what we would call the psychology of perception.
mm,
How we decide something is beautiful. We saw something, but what is it that makes us think that it is beautiful? Now, um, the fact that one is talking about it is a philosophical question, right? But you can imagine the kind of range of responses. And it took me a long time from a scientific background to get to understand, you know, how do we think about and ask these kinds of questions?
mm. Can you, I guess what I'm really curious about is what has it been like for you? How do I ask this? I mean, you've got the whole world's learning going back millennia. And I think, and you speak so joyfully about their work and how they approached it. And I think what I'm really curious about is how, if at all, have the ways that some of your favorite scholars, of the ancient world, have they influenced you at all in how you approach your work?
Yes, I think that um, you know when you're thinking of as a science, philosophy, and religion, these people, in a way, through their own example, provide a window or one perspective, on how they considered it. And so, particularly, when we get to a particular age and a particular profession, like like I am, where the conventional approaches to it don't work personally for you.
Mm,
And so when you look at a person who is, in a way, engaged with it in a philosophical point of view, scientific point of view, and what conventional religion would mean to them, I think that becomes, a window for you to think about is how did this person attempt to address it at his time, in his way, and what do I learn from it? Um,
mm,
that I think, and so I'm not always driven by, let's say, how contemporary philosophers talk about things, but I think to find practicing scientists dealing with this is interesting to me, So also how not how, let's say, theologians talk about religion, but how actually people practice it in their everyday life. So, this is why I like the anthropology of religion versus the kind of, theoretical discourses, which to me, are cerebral, idealistic, but are not the here and now, the blood and the guts of what it is.
mm, hmm. Yeah. I'm trying to remember what the name of this synesthesia. That's what the word is. So synesthesia for um, I have learned basically means experiencing senses when you were expecting to experience another sense, but instead you experience that one. So for me, just an example, whenever I hear the guitar, there are some very specific guitar sounds from the wonderful Eddie Van Halen, and they look to me like sun, like rays of sun. And it's
Mhm.
like, how does something that you hear look like something? And well, the reason it's coming up is because I'm so enjoying hearing you talk about the anthropology of religion, the like you've the psychology of I feel like it was the psychology
Perception.
of perception, yes, and all of these different ways of looking at I don't know things that I would have that a past me perhaps would have thought, well, okay, I've put that in a category, now it's done. But it
Mm.
seems like that's the more I live and experience the world, the more I really am open to the idea of things like not being how I thought they were. And this conversation is just making me think of that.
Yeah, yeah. No, I think, I remember I was at a concert, an all-night concert, uh, at the Cathedral of St. John the Divine.
Mm,
So people may know it. It's a cathedral near Columbia University that was not completed when it was being built because the um, the bishop or whoever it was thought that the money could be spent on other more useful things rather than finishing up the one particular spire or tower that they didn't finish it. I think it's got redone recently. So when I was there, it was still not done.
mm,
But anyway, this was an all-night Indian music concert where they had a person who played the flute, a person who sang, and different things. And at the end, there was a sitar um, piece by Ravi Shankar, who people may know.
mm,
But then he played a very, very well-known morning piece. But as he was finishing, the sun was coming through the stained glass window.
mm,
And so as people kind of, applaud at his performance, he said, no, but you need to look at what's happening, in the world, right? So there you can see that kind of, okay, we heard sound, but you also need to think about this other aspect of things. So this ragas or these musical compositions many times are portrayed as paintings in classical Indian, discussions of music and painting. So there you
Wow.
have
Yeah.
kind of sensation of.
I love it. I love it. And it's also just as things happen, it's I think there's a way into what you and I had really been looking forward to bringing to folks today was about calendars and how we how we have modern calendars. And I think a way into that conversation or into this conversation that I'd love to do is so these windows over here point west. And the other night we're just into a new moon cycle. So like we're now in, the crescent moon is getting bigger and bigger and it's setting further and further away from the sunset, which I really don't want to like make anybody feel super confused. But the moon is something that I love. When I was a grad student in early childhood education, I took a seminar that was about what we were assigned to do was to keep a journal of the moon, just watch what the moon is doing. And maybe 6 or 8 weeks in, what happened was we were all instructed to bring our journals to class and to ask any questions that came up. And people were like, you know, people were trying to understand what the heck is the moon doing and why is it doing it? It doesn't sort of make any sense. And that was sort of shown to us as like what we're doing with children is we're helping them learn in these ways that really start with their own curiosity. And to this day, when I see the moon, I know where the moon is always now. Like I just love it. And the other night it was setting, and where I live now, we live, in a place with very little light pollution. So, and I knew that it was so close to the horizon and it was such a tiny little crescent that the sun had just gone under the sun had like just set, and now we have this beautiful moon. And I thought of it as a way to talk about calendars because calendars, and you will know much more about this than I do, but I believe that calendars are sort of planned or arranged or were conceived of by things like lunar movement, by solar movement. Yes?
Yes.
Yeah.
So it's very interesting. Of, so let's say we think about January 1st as the beginning of the year,
Okay.
and we'll come back to that. But I mean, it's like, how does it work? So until that date kind of came forward, if you want to just move back and say that, look, uh, when we think about an year, the year is based on a solar cycle. How long does it take for the sun to go from one position and to return back to that position? So we
Mm.
can get a little bit more definite in a minute. But the month is based on the moon. How long does it take for the moon to go back to its position? So from new moon to, let's say, new moon or the day before new moon, let's say. And what is interesting is the word moon itself, in English, actually comes from the what we call Proto-Indo-Aryan or Iranian. Ma is moon in Farsi.
Mm.
So you can see that mm, I mean, these civilizations are interlinked. So, but you can still see that our ancestors, could see these things. Our ancestors, when they were farmers, really needed to understand how do we plan for planting? How do we think about this is the season now for sowing, and this is the season for harvesting? And so this notion of being able to have measured time in a calendrical way perhaps arises not from hunter gathering, but from really, the kind of agricultural past that we may have had. Um, Trading becomes important if you're traveling by sea, which most people did, or even on land. How do you decide where should you head?
Mm,
And so the stars at night, in a way, provide some kind of navigational guidance. So what is so much not a part of our day because we have clocks and we have GPS was really, people observe these things.
mm. And just before we move on from there, you referenced the stars, and my first thought was like, why do the stars come into this conversation? And of course, and as I know from my several months out here, they move. That's like the stars. So I've been able to watch. This is the south where I'm sort of indicating now. In front, where you Alnor are, is the south facing
Hmm.
part of our house, and I've been watching not just Orion's belt, but the whole Orion constellation move across the sky, and it's getting later and later and later, meaning like it's it it used earlier in the winter, it was much higher in the sky, is sort of in the due south sky. Now it's much more when I'm going to bed, it's sort of in the southwest because it's because
Yeah.
the so just wanted to reference it because that's what you mean when you talk about people would navigate by the stars because they would have to know where they were in time in the course of a year in order to know what they were seeing, right? Like,
Yes, exactly.
yeah.
So this is, in one sense, for people who were using it for navigation, they were not astronomers. They were not, they were people who, let's say, knew this as practical science, as
Mm,
practical aids. If you want to think about it, people who sailed at that time may not have had instruments, but they knew something about wind directions, currents, and this is how, and they hung around coasts for the most part. Very few open ocean voyages because your navigational aids are not there and all of those kinds of things. So those are pretty rare, at certain periods of human history. Um, so the notion of looking at Orion's belt, let's say, looking at stars, seeing them, rise at different times in the cycle of the year,
mm,
provides us a way of doing timekeeping.
mm-hmm,
So if you think about the fact that we have 12 zodiacal signs, right? So those basically, at some point, people may not have been thinking the way I'm going to narrate it, but they, in a way, divided the sky into 12, the zodiacal belt, which is the belt around in which the sun moves,
mm.
to 12 portions of 30 degrees each.
Okay.
Okay? And you can imagine that if you have 24 hours, then at least at the equinox, where you have equal night and day, you have 12 hours of sunlight and 12 hours of darkness. It means that I went through six zodiacal signs in the day.
Mm,
See, but I can presume are there because I can see the six zodiacal signs at night. And I can see them move, so I can presume that I can't see them because of the sun. So this is the kind of thought process that goes into thinking about, you know, what's there. I may not be able to see it, but it must be there because when I have an eclipse, the sun is darkened. I
mhm.
see it confirms the position I had, right? So that I think is the exciting thing that we're able to, as human beings, make these kinds of deductions and constructions. And it is empiricism, but it requires, in a way, taking that leap of saying, okay, so what's really going on here?
Mm. Oh,
Hmm.
I love that because uh, what we do. what what we do in our society, it feels like to me, is we don't give ourselves or, for example, our kids permission to just be scientists, to just be curious, to just notice, to just observe. We sort of have been trained to wait for someone to tell us, oh, that's what it's going to do. That's why it did. And people can feel so bored and uninspired, but we can always return to it. And that I don't know. For me, that's what's coming up right now. The other thing that's coming up is the development of things like calendars. I remember from when we were talking about bringing this, is that didn't just happen in one little corner of the world. It was a very universal conversation that seemed to, if I'm remembering correctly, went on for millennia all around the world, like everywhere.
So, I mean, I think that we know that, for example, Mayans had their calendars. Obviously, the Mesopotamians, Egyptians, they belong to, with the same area of the world. The Chinese had their calendars. So you can clearly see that these are happening. And of course, they're happening because perhaps they have similar issues of how to measure time. A calendar, in a way,
Mm,
becomes a way of thinking about time. And today, I think, we may think about, oh, okay, the Big Bang and time, and, or we have a much more expansive view of thinking about time.
mm,
I think the original discussions about time, like I mentioned, may have been agriculture, may have been astrological, being able to move the clock back or to move the clock forward and seeing where the planets are. But it arises in what I would call an anthropocentric view. What does it mean in terms of the human being? The human life cycle, let's say. So how does it work in that much more smaller setting? Uh, so as you were mentioning, we can observe the moon, we can observe the sun, we can observe the stars, and we then start in a way following that and try to figure out how there is some regularity to their motions. So it really comes out to being able to measure or at least recognize regularity. Um, and so, most of our listeners will know that we have this cuneiform tablets from Mesopotamia. You
mm.
know, this kind of cuneiform writing, which we had the tablets, but nobody knew how to read them. Uh, and so one historian of science actually recognized that some of the writing was really about positions of planets,
Oh, wow.
right? Now, so let's say you're trying to find a position of a planet in the sky. What are you trying to do? You're trying to basically say, okay, I know that my horizon, let's say where the sun rose, the horizon is in at that spot. And now I want to see where the star is. So I'm going to measure an angle from the rising to where the position is. Now you can see I have an instrument to measure that, but I need units. What am I,
Mm.
right?
Yes.
Right. And so this is actually what gives rise to thinking about, um, you know, um, a circle of motion, the angle in the circle. Why is and ultimately we end up with 360 degrees for the circle. That seems like such an odd number, 360 degrees.
Mm.
Where did it come from? So my guess is, or I don't think we've actually solved that completely.
Oh,
What
so interesting.
the Babylonians in their cuneiform numbers used base 60,
Okay.
not base 10, not digits.
Mm.
They used base 60. And the theory is that, when you end up with fractions like half and a third and so forth, it becomes very difficult as you enter into compound fractions. 5/6 or 5/325 is actually what that means, that you really would like to deal with it in terms of numbers. So you could say, for example, 20 degrees, 20 degrees and 30 seconds,
Mm,
right? And those are all in, at least the 30 seconds are in base 60, but it is a number. It's
mm,
not.
mm-hmm,
So the Babylonians, when they are thinking about the circle has a radius of 60. It's the circle of the sun around the earth. So in their model of the motion of the sun, the circle that they use is base 60. And when the Greeks kind of developed their astronomical theories, they end up with a 360-degree circle. So then there's a connection somewhere that we don't
mm,
know. But later on, a Muslim astronomer who lived in what is today in Afghanistan, very, very, probably one of the better astronomers who was not translated into Latin. His name is Al-Biruni. He is the one who basically says, okay, well, we should also uh, use degrees, minutes, and seconds. So he's like,
mm.
how do we get even more accurate? So they devised astronomical tables. They devised a way of thinking about what's the mean or the average speed of the sun. But we know that it's an ellipse, so that we need to kind of make some adjustments. So they have all of the kind of parameters or numbers which underlies a mathematical theory to make this happen. And the more accurate they are, let's say with um, minutes and seconds in their measurements, the more accurate they can be of actually finding uh, positions as things move.
Wow.
So that's it's very interesting. The data is there, but it does take somebody to say, aha, let's do it this way.
Yeah.
So talking about calendars, I think what is interesting to talk about is you saw the new moon a few days ago. Oh, I think it was Monday, if I'm
Mm.
not. And that's the first moon, shall we say, of this year. So the January moon, if we may call it, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Now, when the Romans actually set up their calendar, they couldn't know where January 1st was, but they could know when the first moon of January came because I could observe it.
Mm.
Well, their new year actually started with the first moon of January.
Hmm. Which is that because it was the first moon after the solstice, after the winter solstice? Like,
Well, so you see, so now we're looking at two different systems, right?
yes. And I thought I only thought of the solstice because it's a marked, it is like, okay, this is the shortest day of the year, longest night of the year. We know that. So
Yeah.
the first moon that would come after that. But what was it that they actually,
No,
how did they decide?
I think you're right because there's no way of knowing what January 1st is.
It's like this arbitrary, anything could be January 1st unless it
Yeah.
was pinned somewhere, right?
So,
Yeah.
but you observe the moon.
Yeah.
But you see that when I talk about two different systems, we could observe that the solar cycle is between 365 and 366 days, right?
Hmm.
Uh, Say, well, I observe it from when the sun enters into the zodiacal sign of Aries, right? Which becomes really the equinox, the spring
Hmm.
equinox. So that's how it's defined. Sun enters into the zodiacal sign of Aries,
Okay.
which in Persian is called Nowruz, the new day. And that's the beginning of their new year.
Okay.
It makes much more sense to look at your new year with spring because it is about new beginnings.
Mm-hmm.
right? And so when you say you want to have new resolutions on January, resolution for the new year, January 1st, it's kind of the middle of nowhere.
People are still sleeping.
That's right.
We're
But
all
if you
under the snow.
but if you have it when, you're talking about the arrival of spring, the beginning of the new day, the days are lengthening, let's say, in the northern hemisphere, then you have not just a physical manifestation of newness, but you have that kind of psychological or spiritual kind of or symbolism associated with
Hmm.
that sign.
It's like they're aligned or in sync in some way. Yeah. Yeah.
So when a person like Rumi, the poet Rumi, thinks about spring, he's not just interested in should we say, the phenomenon of the change of season. He's interested in the spring of the soul. The
Hmm.
soul can, in a way, awaken. So that spring becomes not just the kind of seasonal change, but becomes in a way a symbol for inner transformation. So there's multiple ways of kind of, this we mean by religion and science and, how these kind of come together because people are aware of, finding the symbols in the manifestation of the world because they think God made the world in this manifestation so we can learn from that manifestation.
Wow. And I cannot believe how quickly our time has gone. Our time is very short. And I think this is such an interesting place that we've kind of arrived at, which I was not expecting, about why calendars are were structured the way that they were and how important that was not just in what they were observing, but within themselves.
Yes, yes. And I think so. I mean, I was just thinking about this today, and Stravinsky wrote The Rite of Spring.
Hmm.
This notion of spring as a season and the kind of particular aspect to it, and the fact that he's interested in the pagan Russian observation of this, perhaps, but you can see how, where Easter and spring coincide to some degree, and where there is a new beginning with, where the resurrection of Christ, or, and so forth. There's a lot of associations in this way of how we think of when religious occasions are timed, and when the kind of astronomical or terrestrial seasonal phenomena happen. And
Mm.
I think it's not accidental. I think that to discover the actual reason becomes much more complicated, but I don't think it's accidental.
Yeah, yeah. Ooh, I love this. It's such a beautiful. So we're recording in early January. Well, actually, we're recording in late January. Um, this will come out probably in February, perhaps March. We'll see. But we're getting as we're recording, and I mean, even I've just been noticing in this 6 weeks or so since we've had the solstice. I mean, yeah, the winter solstice. Just how much lighter it is now in the afternoon than it was, just a few weeks ago. And it's like, and I've been giving myself permission to sleep a little later. You know what I mean? To sort of I happened to take a restorative yoga class earlier this week, and the instructor was sort of like talking about us as seeds under the ground in this winter in the northern hemisphere, and this just feels like it's so aligned to that. There's something very common to human beings about being in rhythm, or at least wanting to be in rhythm. And maybe sometimes this is so blocked for us in our daily lives with lights and with,
Yeah.
screens and things like that, and with the demands of our lives. But it's really lovely to kind of take a pause and go, oh yeah, this is every human experiences some sort of rhythm when we allow ourselves to.
But I do think that experiencing is one thing, but to have a kind of a culture that kind of brings it, in a sense, to the in a ritualistic or celebratory way, a recognition, I think, means that it's not just another day. I think you have a cultural, historical memory around that. And since you mentioned the solstice, the at least in the we call the Persianate world. It's
Hmm.
not just Iran, today it's Central Asia. Even the Armenians have this, the Turks have this to some degree. Is they actually observe on the midwinter's night, let's say December 21 or whenever that occurs, as the longest night of the year. But it's observed as a night of poetry and storytelling. And what you have is particular foods like a watermelon, like pomegranate. So there's
Mm.
a kind of fixed menu around this. But why are you observing this? Because your days are getting longer.
Mm.
Spring is about to come.
Yeah. Yeah.
Kind of, it's
Wow.
that awakening, right? And so you can see that, the world speaks to us. Are we open to be part of that conversation? And I think your cultural background, it helps you kind of become a participant because it prepares you to look at what is happening in a particular way. Uh,
Mm.
and I do think that we are, as we today, our historical memories are short. We tend to dismiss things as past, old wives' tales, and so forth. And so we don't really engage with that. I'm working with my wife in Concord. We are trying to set up a discussion of poetry around of spring, and
Ah.
really because Emerson was very influenced by the Persian poet Hafiz, who was a 15th century poet. Okay. And Hafiz got translated into German by Goethe, the German poet.
Mm.
And Emerson translated from German into English. And he was so overcome by the universalism of Hafez that in his journals he says, if there's any poet I'd like to be like, it's Hafez. So we are celebrating the spring poetry. Last year we did of Hafez and Emerson, but this year we're going to extend that into Rumi, into Thoreau, and so forth. Because
Ah.
I think this is a way of bringing back that, notions of these poets who are much more attuned to what was called natural philosophy. Goethe was an exponent of, the philosophy of nature. It's
Mm.
not just mechanistic. Our understanding of science has become mechanistic, and Goethe was very opposed to that. He says, it should really be about nature, the natural world, and the natural world speaks to us. It's not just about numbers and theories. And that's a very interesting way of thinking about science and the natural world.
It is. Oh, what? Yeah. It just feels lovely, you know? Yeah. To to step outside of these um mm, I don't know, things that while great can also make us feel out of tune or not in good rhythm. So what a lovely
Yeah.
thing. And that is in Concord, Massachusetts, right? That's because I remember learning
And,
about
you just got the date. We're going to do it on December 28th.
on
At
December,
No, March 28th,
March
sorry,
28th. There we
at
go.
the West Concord Library. Um,
Wow.
so we'll be posting, registration, all of that soon. But yeah, I mean, I think, it's nice to know that, this context that we have with the different parts of the world, we're connected. We've learned from each other. We share as human beings, you know, um, not just through transmission, poetry, and so forth, but in a way, how we see the world can be the same, even though we're in different places and we never had contact, just like calendars.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, we're human, and that's our humanity. That's our common bond between each other.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I mean, what a great notion to wrap up on. What a great message to take into the day. Ooh, like I somehow knew that I was going to really, really love a conversation with you. And I can remember being on the plane and being like, wow, this is a person who I'd really love to talk with a little bit more. So, and thank you so much for bringing all of your just wisdom and heart and presence to be with us today. It's been
Thank
wonderful.
you for this opportunity. I know that when I talk about these things, people do get interested, but I never thought about doing it the way that you suggested to a larger audience. And I'm so glad that you thought about doing it this way.
Mm, yeah, and thank you for your openness to it. I I'm trying. It's funny because I'm trying to remember how do I usually wrap up this show. I know. I So here's what I will say. If you're listening and you have a question or a thought for our amazing guest, Alnoor Dhanani today, I will give you my contact page and I'll put the link in the show notes so that you can write to me and I will pass messages on or questions on. So that is klockculp.com/contact. And again, the link will be in the notes. And if you'd like to do that, I think Alnor has said that he'd love to hear from you. So um, that would be really fun. And I think in this moment, I'm just so grateful, Alnor, that we got to have this conversation. We get to bring it out to some more people who maybe were needing this inspiration today just as much as I was.
Well, I think I know with the days getting longer, hopefully these are signs for things getting better
Yeah,
around
yeah,
us.
yeah. Love it. Well, thank you so much for being here, our dear listener and our viewer. Um, this has been Art, Creativity, and Wellbeing for today, and we will see you next time. Thanks for being here.